response video to a conference report video, this year one, and maybe we'll just play it through. What the hell? Maybe I'll make this a long video, but yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting subject of how to communicate through this medium of YouTube.
I like being on YouTube, but sometimes it drives me fucking mad. And one of the reasons it drives me mad is there's such a bunch of fucking dickheads on there. The present company accepted, of course. I mean, you want...
Yeah. So he's making a joke there. Present company thing. So yeah. So he didn't. You know, yeah, it's really irritating. Okay, yeah, disagreement in the world is really irritating. Politics is really irritating. Republicans, Democrats, the idiotic language that people use in conversations about what something is. The death tax. Here in this country, they got capital gains tax reductions by making the argument that the money was already taxed when the person earned it the first time. So, if you acquired wealth and were collecting an interest income, the argument was essentially, oh, you already got taxed on that money when you made it the first time. So theoretically, these people would argue that if you were a landlord and you were collecting rents, you wouldn't have to pay taxes on the profit you were making because you already paid taxes on the money you bought the property with. And so therefore you should have a tax-exempt income forever and ever. And the laughable thing is it worked, right? People bought the crap, and yeah, it's just really disappointing that that goes on in the world. That it does matter that people make fallacious and stupid and idiotic arguments, and they get away with it because nobody argues against it, or they don't argue against it effectively, or they don't have enough time to explain, you know, go right from the beginning and explain how the theory of you paid taxes once on the money, therefore you should never pay taxes again, is stupid, right? Okay, but he's pointing this argument at somebody else, maybe even me, right? The last time he made a video about this kind of a subject, it was directed at me. So, but we don't know, right? So my grievance would be, if we're going to grievance on the internet, if we're going to complain about each other, we should at least have the balls to name each other. Should at least name your target in some more effective way. So he's going to talk about somebody here, but he's not going to link to the conversation he had. There's no evidence of, you know, you're just supposed to take his word for it, that the other guy was the asshole and conference report was not the asshole. It's like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to take your word for it. And that's somehow not exactly what you're complaining about, is people just saying shit and say, trust me. Well, that's bullshit too.
Not particularly, obviously. There's so many people out there that are, aren't they? And the particular bunch of dickheads that are on me right now are the people who are so assertive about what they know. They're so sure about the claims that they make. And I don't really just mean religious people here, although religious people certainly, some of them, not the majority, but some certainly fall into that category as well. Just complete fucking dickheads.
Right. So you're a dickhead if you think the world's round, or you know, some other thing. I mean, apparently assertiveness has something to do with dickheadery, which I think again is a bogus argument. So there's all these. My grievance is there's a whole bunch of these people who don't want to know the truth, whether it be global warming or some other thing. And so they find, you know, the fact that there's no God and evolution is shit. And so they want to hold out for some hopeful innovation or some hopeful truth that will be discovered that'll save the day. That it won't look like what all the evidence points to, and that somewhere there's some sort of like, oh yeah, there's some other guy with size 14 Bruno Mollies besides O.J. Simpson that would have a reason to cut his wife's head off. And they're just looking. They're saying, let's leave the door open and just keep looking forever and ever, you know, for the mystery, other thing, the other answer. And so that's the other bullshit here. So I mean, this complaint coming from Mr. You know, you're sort of a Borgite, Yeah, conventional thinker, trying to preserve not only convention, but the convention built into religion, which is hope. And he's selling that shit.
The measure of their certainty so outstrips the amount of actual information they have that it's kind of breathtaking to behold sometimes.
Yeah, well, see, again, you should use a real example of that instead of just talking out of your ass. Because that just kind of breathtakingly ass talking out of-y, you know. So when you could just use real examples. I mean, you could argue that Einstein was talking out of his ass when he said you're not going to be able to make a nuclear bomb. He was wrong, you know. But, you know, and he was an authority, but he was wrong, yeah. So he fucked up. You know, no big deal. But, yeah, he was pretty mocking in his tone. You know, the odds of you splitting an atom are, you know, the odds of me, whatever, shooting sparrows at midnight blindfolded with a gun that doesn't have any bullets in it.
Small comment exchange with someone called iTheist earlier on today about consciousness. And the degree of certainty, the degree of positivity this person seemed to hold was so out of step with the actual information that they had at their disposal.
Alright, so by information you mean how many silly people he's listened to on the subject? What kind of, whether he's read every wacky book, every wacky string consciousness theory, the multi-consciousness, the singular consciousness, the blah blah blah. Should I listen to Professor Anton videos talking forever and ever about how somehow it matters the word fish, whether I see the word fish or I hear the word fish, I somehow don't know what a fish is? I mean, fuck. You know, there's so much crap being spewed by the authorities on these subjects, and I mean crap. Shit they just make the fuck up. And then they have their little PhD, or they have some other little star they're wearing on their suit, and it says, you have to listen to me because I study this crap. And they don't study shit. They ask people inane, silly questions, they get silly answers, and they say, look what this means. It doesn't mean shit. It means you ask people silly questions and you got silly answers. That's all it means.
You know, I mean, clearly, I mean, they've obviously read a little bit about the philosophical zombie, they've read a little bit about Chalmers' heart problem. But the state of consciousness study...
Yeah, which really isn't a hard problem, right? I mean, these things don't really even exist. These dilemmas, these fake problems to be solved. It's like the missing link not existing. Everybody talks, okay, there's no missing link. Yeah, well, the simple explanation is only 1 in about 2 billion organisms gets fossilized. So, yeah, that's right. If the evolution took place in anything smaller than a continent the size of India, oh yeah, and didn't involve members over, say, thousands of years of a population of millions, yeah, there wouldn't be a fossil to even find, let alone finding the fossil. The fossil wouldn't even be made, let alone you having any hope of finding it. Yeah, so there's the simple answer. Right? So it looks like there's a conundrum, okay? But there's no conundrum. There's no problem.
He's so far in advance of that stuff now. And
says the authority guy, right? So you know, what's the point of this arrogant video? I guess maybe you're making a joke. Is this some kind of satire again? Some sort of, you know, playing your double-edged sword bullshit that you like to do? You know, fencing with nonsense. What's the point of asserting? Your assertion is qualified by what authority do you have? How can you even assert that you know the difference between the truth and the falsehood? What's your authority? Don't you understand you have to have some sort of authority on the subject? You have to have you have to be claiming some right to opine based on what are your qualifications? Just reading a book doesn't qualify you.
this person is clearly so far behind the curve that it's kind of astonishing, really. And
yeah, far behind what curve? Again, we've seen where these people curve. We have seen, especially when it comes to theoretical pontificators, you know, we've seen an awful lot of authorities make a lot of claims that are crap, and they tend to want to do it. You know, remember the arsenic DNA molecule? NASA scientists, the truly horrifically bad science that was involved.
And as I said, the amount of certainty they expressed their half-baked ideas is just incredible, really. It makes me wonder what's going on.
Yeah, well, the simple solution would be for you, you know, the people like me, right? I'm in the position where somebody says something I think is crap. Well, then I play their video and explain why I think what they're saying is crap. When somebody tells me the biggest problem in the world is the sensation of guilt, like this is the horror of life, and I'm saying, no, I think having a fucking cancer growing in my nutsack would probably be a hell of a lot worse than feeling a little bit of guilt. And I theorize, you know, I counter-theorize and explain why I can think of a million things worse than feeling goddamn guilty. I mean, literally a million. I can describe a million variations of infectious diseases and other kinds of crap that I would find far more horrific and scary than having some sensation of guilt, especially when the guilt is totally appropriate because I was a bastard, or an asshole, or a fool. Well then, gee, what's the problem? How's guilt a problem then? I do something incredibly ignorant, stupid, foolish, and moronic. I discover that fact and feel guilty, and that's supposed to make sense as that being a bad thing. Now that sounds like a totally appropriate thing to me. So I make my argument. That's all I can do. Unfortunately, I'm making my argument to simpleton fools and morons. Maybe that's the problem we should be talking about, how most people are complete ignoramuses, and it really doesn't matter who's talking to them because they can't understand shit. Yeah. I mean, maybe the least of the problem is these people talking as if they're authorities who aren't authorities, when you consider that the people listening can't tell the difference anyway.
I think one of the things that's going on there is that, and I think I've said this before, but I don't know if I've ever made these videos public, is that...
Oh, there's a sort of irony in making videos. I didn't make these videos public, and then he was talking about how authorities make public conversations and are open to critiques, and it means something, and they could lose their job, and all this other bullshit, and I don't know what that means. So yeah, don't understand that.
YouTube, you know, is essentially a consequence-free zone, isn't it? As opposed to other kinds of fora, other kinds of...
I don't know, is it? You know, I mean, yes, for commenters it is, okay? They have some silly name, no connection to who they are whatsoever. But they're usually the people making videos. They're going to have a channel they have some, you know, investment of time in. They're not going to want to be discounted entirely as assholes. They're not going to want to be a complete fool. So, you know, they're going to have a reputation within a community of some kind that they're talking to. They're not going to want to remain isolated and insulated. Nobody's listening to them. Nobody cares what they have to say. So all that shit's riding on the line for the video makers. Are you just talking about commenters here? Well, then I guess you should have said something. I'm talking about commenters here. But certainly video makers aren't sitting there in the dark making videos just spouting shit in some unaccountable way. No, people can play their video and ridicule what they said and point out why they think they're full of shit and why they have nothing, you know, the facts aren't on their side, and make their argument. So what's the problem? I don't see a problem except for an unwillingness for an awful lot of these people to engage and to defend their shit. You know, they just point to somebody and says, you know, Holocaust denier. They don't back it up with anything. They just slander somebody with it. They don't defend their authority. They don't defend the fact that they have the facts or something when they don't. They just sit there and say, all the authorities agree with me. you know, me, Professor Anton, and blah 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 and blah 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 all agree, so that must be the truth then, right? Thunderfoot says so. I mean, how far do you want to take this crap? So anyway, alright, so I think I'll throw in a context here. Just the only reason why I really did this Fred video was that I actually had a dream with Fred in it last night. So I'll put the camera down for a second. So it was sort of interesting. Well, I don't know. I mean, it was strange. So there was basically just this weird idea that there was some money buried in the ground, $2 million. I don't know for what reason. And I had discovered, you know, through some sort of science I did, where the money was. And it was on this path by this rock. And so I figured this out. And so then I somehow got to the path or whatever. You know, it was in a park, in the woods, someplace, right? And I realized it's Fred's walking path. And so it occurred to me that, well, Fred probably already got the money, you know, because, yeah, Fred's kind of observant, and, you know, there was probably something he figured out, and blah, blah, blah. And so it turns out I was right, you know, because I got to the rock and the money was dug out. You know, there was a jar on the ground. I think Fred was even kicking the jar down the path with I could hear it. And so that, you know, I knew even before I got there that Fred already found the money. And so that was kind of, you know, I was disappointed, but for some reason in the dream it just didn't matter that much. But anyway, the funny part is that, you know, I confronted Fred. I mean, we bumped into each other just because I was there looking, and he said, "Oh, you were looking for this too, huh?" And then he gave me half the money. You know, he gave me $1 million. And I'm like, wow, you know, like I was totally surprised because he only gave, yes, there was some other guy and only gave him $10,000. You know, some guy who had helped them find the money or something. But he gave me half the money, and it was just like really, you know, it was like in a way where he was like, it was like he was saying something like, you know, I think of all the people on earth, you'll probably know how to use this the best, and you know, you're a good, what's the British term they use, bloke or whatever, and they have some other word for somebody who's more friendly than a bloke, lad or something, I don't know, and you know, and so it was, you know, it was really quite charming, you know, but, you know, I felt kind of bad about it because I'm still like, well, you know, Fred is such an asshole though. And but I'm saying, you know, $1 million is $1 million, and I felt kind of guilty for how, you know, I had dissed Fred a little bit inside my own internal consciousness, just to make it easier to say that, okay, I'm going to have to put this guy on the enemy list just because he is, you know, he's going to do this propaganda for the game. So you know, that's the class he's going to have to fit into. And well, anyway, it was just very interesting, you know. And then the funny part is that as I was dreaming this, I started dreaming it as if I was dreaming it. So now I was thinking about the fact that I was dreaming about getting this money, and so I was dreaming about how, well, isn't that a strange dream to have? So I was dreaming about how strange the dream was, and you know, how strange it is that you can dream about, you know, things that'll never happen in the real world, and how I didn't really react in the way I would expect me to have reacted if I had actually won $1 million or gotten $1 million. And somehow, you know, even in my dream, I kind of knew this couldn't be real because I'm not going to get $1 million. You know, like, I know this isn't going to save the day. I'm not going to get some huge amount of money, everything that saves the day, and, you know, I can just you know, spend the rest of my life pondering reality and opining on it and not worry about anything, you know, money-wise. And so you know, my brain already knew that's not going to be my reality, that some other kind of reality is going to be my reality. So anyway, it's just very interesting. So, yeah, that's it. There's nothing more to it. It's just kind of a coincidence of sorts. Kind of. I mean, the subjects aren't directly related, but they're kind of related. It's just interesting, the whole psychology of the people online, and how, I guess the point I wanted to make is that what makes some of this difficult is that we get to know each other, and then you have to get sort of personal with people when they're wrong. I mean, it becomes a personal argument. And people do get personally invested. So when you say you're full of shit or something, they're going to take that personally, and they're going to fight back. And so, yeah, sort of gets personal. Yeah, and that's really the problem, is that this gets personal. But I don't know if there's any way around that. Because these conversations aren't about something that doesn't matter. I mean, everything kind of matters, right? We're not talking about what the best sized dog is or something that really doesn't matter. We are talking about stuff that does matter. And yeah, and it's there's just way too much personal investment in the truths that people are invested in, the perceptions, the definitions, the descriptions of reality they have invested in. Yeah.
Arenas or the kind of environments. Like if you work in some kind of academic field, philosophical field, scientific field, whatever, even artistic field, you do it in public. And of course YouTube videos are public. But normally when you do it in public, within the context of an academic discipline or artistic discipline, something like that, you do it in public in a way that has consequences. So you get on your hind legs at a conference and you say what you think, and you're surrounded by your peers, people who are, many of whom will know more than you do about the thing that you're opining on.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's kind of who cares, right? So he's basically saying that there's this peer review in the professional classes of conversation, and that there's something real going on between these people, but I don't know if there really is, right? I've seen plenty of conferences, and it looks like a bunch of tiptoeing around stuff, and every once in a while somebody calls somebody on their bullshit, but most of the time it's just this, everybody just goes around, says their little spiel, and nobody really accounts for the disagreements that exist. And a lot of times there isn't that much disagreement because the conference really isn't intended to resolve anything. It's just a social club for a bunch of people who already agree with each other. So that's a problem too. A lot of conferences don't bring out anything because it's all people on one side of the argument who are just basically saying, let's have a party and we'll talk about stuff a little bit to justify it.
And what you've got to say stands or falls according to how it's received by your peers. And their job, really, is to make you look stupid, is to point out things that you've got wrong. And when it's their turn to speak, your job is to do the same. But not in that kind of pornage way.
Yeah, well, not in any kind of realistically useful way. I mean, your guy, your Antonio Damasio guy, sat there on a stage with the Dalai Lama and, played patty cake. Played the game. Played the let's recontextualize everything you said, and then I'll recontextualize everything I said, and we'll just make sure that we don't offend each other. And, this is all kind of horse shit. They ought to have gotten to it. They ought to have gotten to it, damn it.
Familiar from YouTube, not in that simple way of ridiculing. No, you do it in a way which will threaten that person's livelihood. And they will do it in a way which threatens your livelihood.
Yeah, well, I don't see any of that happening in these peer review things or in these. Why doesn't nobody calls deGrasse Tyson on the fact that in one of his little spiels in his performances, he argues how unrealistic life in the universe is, and then in another spiel it's like, oh, life is everywhere, but it's just made out of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, and that stuff's all over the goddamn place. So, I mean, which is it, butthead? No, you need to do that. I mean, there's something wrong with all of them in some respect, right? I mean, even, some smart guy, and then he's completely an idiot on something like the Arab War or something. He's a warmonger, and you're like, what the fuck? Where does that come from? Oh, you're Jewish. Shit. Now that's got to corrupt the science. Now you can't be you can't just do science. You got to be a Jewish scientist. Fuck.
Which threatens your professional reputation. Will actually have real-world consequences. Which is why that if you go to an academic conference of any kind, the people who put out ideas are usually very, very humble, Their ideas are hedged in with lots of caveats, with lots of maybes, with lots of conditionals. Because they know.
Yeah, well, whatever. Lots of bullshit. But yeah, I just don't see the. I don't see what he's seeing. Okay, I see people going to conferences and talking about, well, I got 17 books now. I mean, Dawkins does conferences, in a way that is hilarious, right? Because he shows up for 15 minutes and does some sort of hit and run overview, and that's it. I mean, what the fuck? But yeah, he'll certainly challenge some 16-year-old girl with some silly notions about God. Yeah, well, then he's got his challenge boots on. It does seem a little convenient that he doesn't seem to pick fights with somebody who can fight.
Their professional reputation, their very livelihood, stands or falls on the basis of whether they're right or not.
But to be fair, Dawkins he is careful. I mean, he is careful. He's careful with the way he uses his language. And he does, when he starts talking out of his ass, he just says, I'm talking out of my ass now. So I did see him do a speech in Australia where he just talked out of his ass about life in the universe. And he was full of shit. But you couldn't really call him on it because he did say, I'm not talking as a scientist now. I'm just talking as a wishful thinker. Which was, who the fuck wants the scientist to talk about their wishful thinking? What the fuck use is that? I mean, I'm not terribly interested. It's like him talking, why don't he just bring his favorite pair of shoes and tell everybody, this is my favorite pair of shoes, and this is, we've had a long time relationship and I really like this pair of shoes and we've gone to some really great places I mean, he could do that. But I sure as couldn't fucking care. I'm not interested.
Consequences for being wrong. And the consequences for being wrong force you to temper your confidence.
And what? You don't think there's any of that on here? Well, I think there certainly could be. It's not that much work for somebody to make the argument, to point out how somebody's just saying, I mean, some of it is difficult because some people just do the tearing down thing. And it's hard to argue with the people with the sledgehammer. Because sometimes those sledgehammer arguments mean that I have to construct the whole thing. I have to explain it from the very beginning and explain all the bricks and all the whole thing, how it's built. Because they're not, they can't get any other way. So I mean, those things are a little bit, when somebody starts getting into why, what happened the moment before the Big Bang, or some kind of crap like that, and you have to explain how, well, all the fingerprints and all the footprints aren't going to exist anymore. These are places we'll never be able to go, so they're not relevant. Well, anyway, I don't want to get into. But there's lots of arguments that are very difficult just because of the way people are for obliging you to prove what can't be proven. And you have to basically prove why it's unnecessary to know that bit of crap.
On YouTube, there is no reason to temper your confidence. And so you get wankers and arseholes.
Yeah, well, I wish you would just put up a list. Let's see who you think are the wankers. Because frankly, you're on my wanker list. And you asshole list, sure, why not? You're on it. You're on mine. I don't see you saying stuff that means anything. It's all this babbly, like a lot of people, it's like Anaconavod uses something that's a real problem, and he converts he attempts to make it the villain. It's like making guilt a bad thing, and everybody just falls into it, and it's kind of accepts it, like, oh yeah, guilt is what gave me cancer. No, guilt didn't give you cancer. It's ludicrous, okay? The problems in your life were not created by you having the sensation of guilt. The problems in your life were as you mistreated everybody in your life. I mean, the fact that your best friend, ran you over in front of the liquor store is because you stole his fucking money. God damn.
Like atheists, but laudable as folk as well. As I say, whose knowledge is minute, but whose confidence is enormous.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to do better at the naming of the names thing here. This is just too vague an accusation.
They think they can just say, well, it's a fact, and that's that then, without doing any of the fucking work that it requires to establish a fact. I mean, I love YouTube for various reasons. I like the fact that it's a sandpit and we can put half-baked ideas out there and do things that are kind of interesting. But this is the bit that annoys me enormously. That bit where some twat is just asserting that.
Twat. Yeah, whatever. Again, you know, some, you know, and you're making it sound as a problem here, so why don't you give it more reality than just this some idea, and demonstrate it with a more specific argument, you know, than this vague, I was right and he was wrong, for surezies.
Picking a brand of bullshit and mistaking it for actual authority.
Ah, actual authority. Now that's the tricky one, right? And so I guess I would argue that who cares about authority? Let's just strip all of that pretense away, and let's oblige everybody to make every argument from the source, from the beginning. And so, yeah, I'm not saying they have to do all the work. They can just say, look, here's the according to you know, Darwin's evolution of species, this is blah blah blah, here's the premise argument, and when building onto that premise, here's argument 2, and you know, you can cite other sources maybe, you know, just to make things, you know, so you don't have to explain every aspect of, you don't have to go through all the pigeon examples and say, see, here's pigeons, and this is how natural selection is proven, and here's Mendel's peas, and this is how you know, this mathematical relationship exists. You know, I'm not saying you have to do all that, but I'm just saying, well, you could probably just do it the way I did. You can reference sources, but reference them with some sort of context about what the source actually demonstrated. And you know, you should be able to describe the car, you know, without getting into every detail, what every little valve does and what every little control mechanism does, and get the idea of, okay, it's combustion engine, the gas goes in, it's pressurized, causes heat, then it's ignited, and that multiplies. You know, it's ignited under pressure. You know, it's something r squared of the circumference of the cylinder will dictate how much you know, the gas will displace the cylinder, and blah blah blah, and then you're off to the races, so to speak, and it creates this many you know, units of torque or whatever. You know, you don't have to get too specific, but yeah, get specific enough to make your argument. Something like that, anyway. That's, I think that's enough of a video, right? Yeah, it turned out to be a pretty long video. Alright, well anyway, so that's the Fred video for the day thing. And, but yeah, I don't, you know, you know, there's Anton right there. I sympathize, Fred. Yeah, I know, but I don't, you know, you sympathize with what? Because you do this all the time, Professor. I mean, come on, you made 3 videos in a row, all frustrated because you can't get people to understand some sort of idea that people with an intelligence and a brain should give a fuck about the difference between the written word Fred and the spoken word Fred. Who cares? The ideas you want to convey is that, oh, we're talking about Fred, or we're reading about Fred. Who cares what form the discussion takes? It's the concept, and whether the word Fred and, you know, some evil doing is being referenced, whether Fred and, you know, Adolf are in the same paragraph. I mean, that's all. The context of the conversation is all that matters. Conveying the understanding is what you're attempting to do. And so what is this crap? This authority telling me I should somehow give a fuck whether I hear the word, or whether I read the word, or whether I see the object, or whether I just think something, versus ever writing it down, or ever speaking it, or ever attempting to describe it. But that's all this language shit is. It's just a way of describing, hey, this is what I'm seeing, here's my description of it. I see something in my head, here's my description of it. That's all we're doing with language, is conveying our descriptions of what we are understanding. What we're seeing is relationships between things. What we're seeing is the future. What we're thinking the past has been. Yeah. Anyway, enough of this crap. Pretty much.